Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Brandon today. Brandon is an individual that reached out to me through email. He's a listener and reached out with some interesting things that he would like to share from out there in the Pacific Northwest. I'll let him fill in the details with that. But Brandon, how's it going today, man?
Hi, Jeremiah. Good. How are you doing?
Oh, we're doing pretty good. Starting to get a little chilly out here in Iowa, but I think we're going to make it through. So I've been looking forward to chatting to you tonight. So yeah, man, go ahead and feel free to take us back to when this all started for you, these Bigfoot encounters that you had over the years.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, my brother and I would go camping. It seems like we went on a camping trip every summer with our dad. And so we would go up and we would usually camp around Mount Rainier. And one of the summers, and this was back in 1989 to 1990, I believe I was 10, almost 11. It was, either July or August. And we were up on a mountain. It's called Burley Mountain. And it's close to, the closest town would be Randle, Washington. So not far from, like Packwood, and you go up that Highway 12, which runs up to Mount Rainier on the west side. So you got a pretty good view from up there. So we went up there, and it was a dry campground up there called a pull patch. And it wasn't, there wasn't really anything, I don't think, up there to really bring in too many people, where it was located. And so we were up about, I think around, I would say close to 4,000 feet. But I remember going up there and, just a little side thing was like before, when we first got there, my brother and I was, us being kids, he was a little bit younger than me. We were out exploring and checking out around the camp, and we found these big boulders, piles, and there was like 3 different mounds of them. And then it kind of funneled down in the centers of them, and it was all to the ground. So we just thought it was kind of cool. So we were playing around that, which I didn't, really think much of it then. And then we had 4 nights of camping up there, and it was actually my dad, so my brother and I, and then he had a girlfriend with a couple of kids, a boy and a girl. So it was all of us. So we had one of those, really common green canvas kind of Coleman tents, back in the 80s. And so it wasn't, like we have now, but it was big enough for us. So the first night, nobody was there. The second day, nobody had came in. It was just us in the campground. There's probably about 8 to 10 spots there at the most, I'd say. It's pretty small. And I remember we had a fire going, and I was the first one. For some reason, I was tired, I guess, before anybody else. But anyway, so I went to bed. So this second night we were there, and I ended up waking up on my back, and I'm on the far right side of the tent. And we had the screen open so you could see out the top window part on the tent. Well, as soon as I opened my eyes, I looked up and I saw this thing standing there. And it was staring down into the tent, right? Really within, probably a foot, really close to the tent, maybe 2 at the most, a foot or 2. It was really close to the tent. And it was looking downward, and it was just staring. And I started looking at it, and I could see a little bit of light still from the fire, and everybody had went to bed. And it resembled a man in the face, but it had this long hair. But I noticed on the top of its head, which I thought was strange, confusing too, was it had ears that were sticking up, and they were somewhat rounded on the on sides of the head towards the top. Now, but when I started looking at the face, kind of analyzing down it, it resembled a very hairy man, and it had, I would say, about 3-inch hair, dark eyes, and it just was very, it didn't make any expression at all. It was just staring, and it never even blinked the whole time I was looking at it. But as I was looking down, I could see this thick hair going down its neck, and I could see about, I would say, just the upper part of the chest is about as far as I could see. And it was standing there, and I'm thinking it's standing there like a man. And I really thought it was a man, but I'm like, those ears are weird. And I'm like, it's just way too hairy. I've never seen a man look that hairy, So, a kid's perspective, I'm thinking, I don't know what it is. And so I was laying there and thinking, am I dreaming? Is this real? Am I dreaming? And so I remember just hearing the wind and the crickets, and I knew it kind of really just settled in that I'm awake. I am really looking at this thing. And I didn't know what to do. And so I I got really scared, I remember, and rolling over and, thinking I was right up against the side of the tent, basically, right at the edge of the tent. And I'm like, there's nothing to protect me. And so I rolled over towards my brother that's in the sleeping bag next to me, and I look over and I see everybody sleeping. And I just shut my eyes, and then I'm out. And I woke up, I know, the next morning, and I didn't say nothing to anybody about it. I didn't tell my dad. And I remember going out and looking, and we had a picnic table, and there was some little marks on some bread that was left out, probably from mice, could be, but I didn't see anything messed with. But I was confused on what I saw. I'm like, I could see the ears kind of, I'm thinking bear with that, but it looked way too of a man looking with all the hair and the way it was straight up and down like a person would be standing. And I was like, well, I don't think a bear would be doing that, but the face was more, to me, it reminded me of kind of a typical caveman would look like in the face. And the other thing was, it was maybe a little taller than the tent, but it wasn't that tall. So it wasn't like super tall, obvious, like you hear some encounters. So I didn't know. I was just like, I don't know what it is, but it really scared me. And I knew I saw something. And so I remember on the third night, we had somebody come in towards the evening and camped. And then after the fourth night, we had left and started heading down the mountain. And then I said something to my dad, and I said, I saw something. And I told him, I don't know what it was, but I did mention maybe it could have been, as a Bigfoot, which, I knew a little bit of, growing up in this, the Northwest. But I told him, and he kind of just like was thinking, oh, maybe I'm just, imagining or dreaming or something. And I said, no, I really did see something. So I kept repeating it a few times. And he goes, oh, okay, well, I believe you that you saw something. And so leaving then, and heading back, I didn't know. I kept going over in my head and not knowing what exactly I saw, but I was leaning towards what I thought it was probably. And I'm thinking to myself, like, well, back then it wasn't so mainstream. So I didn't know like, I didn't really have the internet, to jump on, and or being so young too, I guess. But so I just but I did have some relatives that I found out not too long after that had encounters. Um, One of them that stands out is my grandma on my mom's side. She's passed now, but she, back in the 70s, she said that her and my grandpa were road hunting up in Aberdeen, Washington area, and she said they were driving along and there was a meadow, and every time she'd tell the story, because she'd tell it over the years to us grandkids, and that this hairy, long human with long arms was swaying its arms and walking through this opening of this in this meadow. But when she saw it, she didn't even know she couldn't even say anything. So they're driving along. Well, they passed it, and got back to the trees, and she goes, "Oh, I think I saw," and then he turned or backed up, and it was no longer in the field there. But they had talked to the locals in the area, she had said, and the loggers that were in the area, and said, yes, we do see that one. We've seen it before at different times. So that story growing up, and then an uncle of mine, I actually had one of the Bigfoot things down the road happen with him. He would tell a story that he had seen one walking over. It was over west in Oregon, over in let me see, what area was it? Towards Hillsboro, but just south of there. Let me think of the name. But anyway, he said that when he was in his early 20s, he had seen one around dusk, and it was walking through a graveyard, and it kind of creeped him out, and he'd tell that story over the years. But I didn't know, like, I'm thinking to myself, is there just like so many, a few of these out here, like, I didn't understand as a kid. And when I got older, well, let me see, really, actually, now I want to put this in there because this is something that I didn't pay attention to a lot. So when this was probably a year or two before my encounter happened. We actually moved to a town over near Mollala, Oregon. It's Colton. It's just a small little town kind of between Estacada and Mollala. And so we moved on almost 5 acres, and it was a base of the Cascade Range there. And it's actually, the mountain's called Goat Mountain. And so we moved into this old house, and it's weird was things would happen there, and it really didn't add up to anything. But one of the things I think early on was my mom would say that she would hear the back door, a handle wiggle, and also little rocks would come up and hit the back side of their house once we put an addition on. So it was after that, so probably a couple of years of living in it. Could be a little longer, but anyway, the back of the house. But my stepdad would work graveyard at a bakery, and she said it always happened when he was gone. So these things would happen. She didn't know what it was, but she knew that she could hear the handle moving on the door, and then the rocks hitting the back. I think they had a slider, glass window door there in the back, and I would say about 95, when we were there, these 2 Bigfoot guys came up and would ask questions, come on and talk to us. And they were telling us, that these Bigfoot come on our property, and basically what it was is we had on the right, or excuse me, the left side of our property from the roadside was all BLM land, going down and kind of around, and then there's 2 other little properties that were, one of them in the middle was smaller and the other one on the other side of us on the right. There was those 3 clusters of little properties, and then it was all BLM land around us, except on the other side there was a big acreage somebody had owned. But it's weird was I remember one incident that happened there that I thought was odd, and I didn't know what was going on, but I was about 15, 16 on the property, and I remember I was walking up. We had this driveway down. We had a trailer at the bottom, kind of towards the bottom of the property. But I was walking up the road, and there's pretty heavy, thick forest we had a fence along the BLM side of our land. So towards the road, it'd be on our left. And I was walking up it towards the road, and it was fall. And I remember hearing what sounded like leaves crunching, crunch, 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 like that. And I was like, and it was just across from me on the other side. And it's really dark in that forest. And I would stop, and it stopped. And I'd start walking again, and it would start back up. So as soon as I stop, I hear crunch, stop, So it did that a few times, and I just thought something was there watching me. And in my head, not really knowing a whole lot, then I'm thinking maybe it's a cougar, and then I'm finding out, cougars typically will stalk you, from behind on the corner, kitty corner. So I'm like, and then I've heard, then I kind of put together these other reports I've heard of where they were being paced right by, like just like that. And so I had wondered about that looking back, if there was one over there that was heading up the property. Now, I do know one of the things that really stood out that I remember around that period is when those two guys come up there, those guys that were investigators in Bigfoot. One of them actually, he was a cook at my school, or my grade school. So he was younger, probably, I don't know, probably 10 years younger than the other guy, which he had lived over in Estacada, actually. But anyway, they came up a few times, but one of the trips up, they took us across the street, my stepdad and I, and they said, look at this. And they showed us these trees. They were about 8 feet up. And the branches, there was probably 5 or 6 of them. And they were like somebody had took a hand and cranked them around and around. They were all twisted up. And they said that they thought, what they said, they thought the Bigfoots were up there doing that, and they would show each other their strength, is, what they said. Now, my stepdad totally did not believe in anything like that, which I still don't think he does. But, we had no explanation for that. It's like, I know no grown man could ever do with those branches. They were thick enough. There's no way anybody could have cranked them like that and twisted them. And they also said that they had rocks thrown at their vehicle when they left. They said the last time they were there. And so, I didn't really know what to think, so I kind of feel like, I did come across some footprints one time when I was about 12. We were playing outside in the snow. It was in the snow. So it wasn't probably real fresh, but it did resemble footprints. And we were just being kids. We were playing hide and go seek out in the snow, and coming across this like trackway of tracks, but it didn't look like our feet. It looked more like bare feet. But I just kind of shrugged it off and went back to doing what we were doing. But I do know I did have one, and I don't know what this was, but I remember, because we had obviously possibly bear. I know we had a cougar because I saw one, a pretty good sized cougar one time. I was standing out in the driveway, and my uncle and one uncle was like, we happened to see this. I don't know if he saw it and told me to come out, but it was just going up the road, but it was a good sized cougar. And but I know my mom had seen a bear cub down the road too one time. So we knew there was bear around, but I did have one winter evening I was outside, and I was around 15, 16. I had a little puppy, and it was just after dark. And I was just taking the puppy outside, do his thing and come back in. Well, I heard this growl, and it was a pretty deep growl, and it came from across the road from our house in the trees. And I don't know what that was. I thought bear, I'm thinking to myself. And I went in the house right away. And I told my stepdad, I was like, well, I just heard this real deep growl outside. And he's like, oh, it's probably a neighbor dog. But I knew it wasn't no dog. I knew it had to have been a bear. But I think it was a pretty big growl. I mean, it kind of reminded me, but maybe not quite to that level. But and I'm sure you've seen it, but Finding Bigfoot starts up, the beginning. I mean, but not to quite that level, I'd say. But it resembled that. But, I know that my brother and I, we built some forts outside. And there was a time, I remember on the back of the property, we had a 3-wheeler, and I was cutting down, trying to make a trail. And just feeling like I'm being watched, didn't see anything. But I really felt like I was being watched that day. And so I just I didn't know exactly, but later on in life, I would say, after that era of that time, it really got me as I got really curious. And I saw a show on TV, and this was probably around 2008 or 2008. And it said if you had a Bigfoot sighting, that you can contact, and it was a BFRO, so at the end of this show, and I was like, I was like, I wouldn't mind saying something about this to someone and see if they got anything that I could learn or feedback on it, and what they think. So I did that, and this guy had called me up that lived up in well, actually he lived in Spanaway, Washington is where he was from. But anyway, he calls me up, and we get to talk, and he wants to know more detail in the face, what I saw. And then he starts giving me some information that I didn't know about at the time, like he was letting me know about how, at that time I never heard about him going down on 4s, running around like that they, if you get eyes on them, you may not want to look away or anything, because they very well could be gone really, really quickly. And so it made me kind of think, wow, I wouldn't mind seeing one again or having some encounters. So I contacted my dad, and he lived up, still around the Mount Rainier area. And we had decided, because I had talked to this guy, and I was like, well, I'd like to go up in the Cascade Range. You think we might be able to, have an encounter? And he said, oh, yeah, they're definitely up there, just where, but they're up there. And so we planned a camping trip, and I would say this was in, let me see, 2008, 9, right around there, because it was actually right before Finding Bigfoot came out, the first season started. And so we went up there, and we ended up doing was, we thought we'll find a place where hopefully nobody's at, or maybe we're at dead ends up. So what I did was I researched the Mollala River Corridor, and on BFRO back in that time, there was 30 some encounters. And I'd been in the Mollala River, in the summer a little bit, but I never had really gone up the river, and it goes up quite a ways, up that river. And so we decided, okay, we'll go up there, and we'll find a spot, hopefully, by ourselves, and we'll see what happens. So we ended up going up. We ended up going up for, I believe, it was one night. So it was about the middle of the week. It was actually August 22nd, I believe, of that year. We went up there, and so we had found a spot. We went way up past the river. Actually, we veered off to the left. We found some roads that went up, and it actually, probably as like a crow flies, we're probably 10 miles. We ended up north of Detroit Lake. So it was out there. And so I actually at the time had 3 boys and they wanted to go. So I went ahead and, and the thing was, is like one of the things this investigator told me is like, and this is not that I can 100% anything's guaranteed, but he's like, they're very curious and they're very curious. They'll come around, like you can't just go out and look for them. Usually normally you want them to come to you. So I thought, and they're curious of, especially, curious of little ones. They're more comfortable with, little kids, being around, or females more than males. And so anyway, the boys wanted to go. So my dad he had a conversion van. And so we went up in the middle of the week and we got up to the spot and it was almost dark. It was dusk at the time. We found the spot, a dead end, and we could tell, nobody could go by us, drive by us. It veered off by itself and ended at the end of this road. So we get out, and my boys were kind of scared. They're pretty young, I guess, and they were like, "Oh, it's getting dark," kind of carrying on a little bit, and we calmed them down. We got a fire going, and I think we had marshmallows and stuff, so the kids enjoyed it, and then we thought maybe we'll do a little, just see what happens after the boys, 3 boys go to bed. So we got them to bed, in the van. There's a pretty well used game trail that veers off to the right of camp. It kind of goes out a ways. My dad decides he's going to go over that way and head down that a little bit. And I was going to walk up the road just a little bit from our place, right? So there's a hill that drops down, I would say 150 feet. There's a tree line. Well, I decide, I'm going to try a little call, just not too loud, but I actually had bought a megaphone, but I'm like, I'm not going to bring that out with the kids sleeping, So I do kind of a scream kind of down a little bit. And soon as I did that, Jeremiah, I hear something just cruising up the hill, and it's breaking everything in its path. I could hear all this cracking, and it's coming straight up to me. And I knew when I heard this, I was like, I know that whatever this is, it's big, because it's breaking everything in its path. And it comes straight up, stops, right in the tree line there. And I'm standing there just thinking, okay, what should I do? So I do some clapping, put my hands out, I say hi, I'm just gestures trying to see if I get anything. Well, I did start getting this chipmunk squawking up in the tree, and it would go over and over and over, like tattling that this thing is right there, down below. And so I probably have that for about, I don't know, probably 5 minutes or less. And then my dad comes walking over to me, and he tells me, he goes, I was over there and I heard this thump, like stomp sound that hit the ground hard. And then he decided to go ahead and head back to camp. And so he tells me that, and I tell him, well, I just heard something, and it's big, and it came right up to the end of this tree line here and there, and it's there. It's got to be there. And so he's got a night vision, just a regular first generation, but there's an opening between the trees a little bit. And so we're kind of taking turns trying to look, and, and then the chipmunk was still squawking off and on. And then my dad, he turns to me and he goes, I just got hit with 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 a little like rock, like a pebble sized rock in the pant leg. He had pants on like the army khaki ones. So they were, they weren't real close to his legs, but he said he felt it. And then he goes, but not once, twice. And he said, and I got hit twice in the same spot. And so, and I thought, whoa. So I thought, well, I just felt like if at that point, I know my heart is starting to pick up a little bit, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, well, if this is real and this is really what's going on, I just found it kind of hard to believe. I mean, just going up there and then happening like that. But I thought this is probably real, most likely, because I knew it wasn't a human and I knew it wasn't probably a normal animal at that point, So we were just listening and looking back and forth. We never saw anything with the night vision go between the trees. But I do remember then, probably after I'd say 15 minutes, I hear some movement, and it's just barely, I don't think my dad could make it out, me being my late 20s at the time, but I could hear something, but it was barely. It was moving from the right side to the left towards that other noise that came up there. So it's almost, and I could hear it just enough to know that it was moving through there. And then it just, after about, I would say 30 minutes, the chipmunk quit. It went quiet. And so we went back to camp and nothing else happened that night. Well, I know the next morning I was excited to go and get down in the forest, and see if there's any signs of what happened last night. And so there were some dry riverbeds going up. It was pretty gnarly, thick brush. There was devil's clubs up and down these dry riverbeds that were going down. So it was really hard to get through, and I had some tall boots and I had trouble getting through it. But I knew that there was no chance that it was a person, going through that at night, because it was, I would say when it happened, it was between 10:30 and 11 o'clock when the activity started happening that night. But I did notice, and the ground was dry and it was fir needles and everything down, but I did make out a footprint that really looked like a footprint, just enough that it looked like a footprint with toes going to the left, like something was moving from the right to the left through there. And so I did end up, I don't know where it happened, but I did have a picture with, I don't remember what I used for size comparison, but I do remember measuring it, and it was, I think it was 14-inch, the size that I measured, the one that really stood out to be very probable. And so that was really I wish I could have seen more of what it broke. I really didn't make out too much. And I know I was kind of feeling like a newbie out doing this, but I know whatever that was that came up there that night had to have been, it sounded like they were describing an elephant. It sounded huge, and it was just moving at a good pace, up to the top. Now, so we had one night there. And the next day, we ended up staying for part of the day. I know I did find this branch that was right along that game trail, and a tree that went up. And right along that trail, there was a branch that was about, I would say, or a tree that went up, and it was bent over. And it was bent over all the way down. And it was, I would say, a good 3-inch thick. And it was down, ripped down at that. And I just thought, wow, we didn't see it being natural, and that would take a lot to do that. And so we had one night there, and I had to actually go back to work. So my dad, I think he went and hung out with my brother that lived local, and then we ended up meeting back the following week. So we went back up, and I think at that point it was just me and him. No, and actually the boys were there too again because they wanted to, go because so they ended up going too. And we found two other locations that were right near that spot we were at. So we thought we would try one of those. Now, one of them went down because hearing this thing coming up from like the valley. So I thought, well, why don't we get down in the valley a little bit more where maybe it came from? We were thinking. So we went down this road, I would say about, I would say it's 3/4 of a mile down this gravel road that veered off from the main one and down, and it looped around, and then it ended down there, and there was an old like logging area. They had logging road that went up, and it's overgrown, and so we camped out there, and it was really, really quiet. I remember, and one of the nights, I think it was, let me think. I think we went up for actually, how many nights was it? I think it was 3 nights, I'd say. 3 to 4 nights. It was at least 3 nights. And I remember one of those nights, it was getting late, and it was really quiet, nothing going on. We had a fire going. The boys were sleeping, in the van. So we thought, maybe we'll just go up the road a little bit, up that road. And, I got one more thing I should add before this. So that day before this, so we had walked up that old road, that dead end up there with trees down and stuff. So my dad was like, I'm getting this feeling like we're being watched. And I told him, I said, yeah, I actually feel that too. And so we had this weird feeling of being watched. Well, so everything went quiet, that evening until we decided about, I would say 2:30, 2:45, somewhere around there. We walked down the road. There was a little creek. So we did some calls, and then we didn't hear anything come back, no noises. So we wandered back to the camp. Well, we sat down at the fire. So we're just sitting there, probably 10 minutes. Actually, it wasn't even much time at all because we sat down and we're just sitting there, and it was probably a few minutes. And then we hear this whistle from the woods, and it's right now about 3 a.m. And this whistle was an attention whistle, right to the T. And I'm like, that was not a bird, and he goes, no. And we knew, the whistle sound, of course, what it was. And so, and I'd say it was, I kind of pointed what direction I thought it was in the woods. And he thought it was actually a different one, but I was pretty sure what direction it was from. So we get up, and, it gets our attention, right? So we're looking over there, can't see anything. I actually had a video recorder going, which I think I actually have that whistle. It was on a little Sony Handycam, which, I couldn't ever get it, but I think if I hooked it up to speakers, I might be able to get it. But anyway, so it got our attention. Well, we knew that was not vocals from a bird, and it wasn't, we did not think it was a person up there, right? Because it was a dead end. It was the middle of the night. And so that was weird. And then, so we went back, we thought, wow, that was something to hear. And then, things ended up dying down after that. And then, we went to bed. I remembered calling up that investigator guy because I told him we were going to go camping. I go, hey, so I want to tell you what happened. And so I told him about the first incident I told you about, and then I told him about the whistle. And he goes, well, it's exactly what it was. It was trying to get your attention over there. He said, more than likely, there was another one around your camp closer. And I said, well, yeah, the boys were sleeping in the van. I wanted to go back up there to the area But I really wasn't wanting to go up there by myself. My dad living, 2.5, 3 hours away, he would, wouldn't be able to always get back to go. So I know some time went by, and I had some friends from a church I was going to, and we went on this trip with them. It was to a cabin at a lake, actually, and I was telling them, hey, Finding Bigfoot was on, and they kind of watched a little bit of it, and I was telling them, well, I had these things happen up here, and it seems like they're around. It seems in this area. We actually went up there, I would say, a couple of years, so about 2000. If I can remember exact date, 2011, but it was like in June. It was early enough. There was still snow up in the area that we would normally go to. So we really were antsy to get up there. So we ended up going up past the river, and then we veered off at a place that it's called Table Rock. And there's a Table Rock trail on this mountain. And there's actually a Rooster Rock trail on the other side. So we went up there, and we took a right, and we went out to the end where it dead end, and we decided maybe it was a good place to do vocals and camp. So we wanted to go ahead and just do a camping trip there and check it out. So we ended up camping there, and I remember I was doing calls out into the valley, down into the river, corridor. Well, around dusk, I thought this was a little odd, but, we didn't really know what to think of it too much. So there was a dark, like, military chopper that was coming low just over the road over the corridor, just going slow up the river area, and then it would turn around and go back slow. And we were like, I wonder what's going on. Maybe they're looking for somebody. So I don't know what that was about. So I think it at least went up once slow and then back down through. And we thought that was a little odd. And then, so later on that night, I had a voice recorder going at camp. And, I look back and, you think you wish you would have done things differently. Now, this voice recorder was set on sensitivity mode. So anyway, it was going. And all of a sudden, my dad hears it first. He's like, do you hear that? And I'm like, it was a really sharp pitched scream. And it was like up over that mountain, somewhere on top or just on the other side. But it was long, like it would start low, go up, and then it would drop down. So, the closest to me would be like the Ohio howl is what how it sounded like. Now, it went off 5 times. We were like, that sounds like very sharp pitched, like it's either female, because we didn't know what else it would be. It was so loud and sharp. And, and I had stopped doing calls for a little while, and it just started up like that. And it was 2:15 in the morning is when it started. And so it went off 5 times. We both agreed it was either female or it sounded like maybe it was teenage, And so we had a trail cam. After that, it went quiet. So we thought, well, maybe we'll get something, who knows? So we went ahead and, went to bed, and next morning, and all we got was a bird, flying in, and that was it. But that was the first time we had, well, really the only time I've heard the vocals like that. My recorder did not pick up the sound. It wasn't close enough for it to pick it up. The other thing I thought was a little interesting was on the other side of that mountain. So we went over there in a different time. I think it might have been because of what happened there. We thought there's a trail, a horse trail that runs up to the middle of that mountain. And you can kind of see it before you head up from the river. And and it goes for, I don't remember if it's like 18 miles, but it goes and goes. So I'm wondering if possibly that Bigfoot was along there somewhere, possibly, but I had never went up that. I've never been up to that. But we did decide the next time around that, hey, let's go camping on the other side of this mountain on the Rooster Rocks road that goes up the Rooster Rock Trail. So we ended up going, it wasn't too long. I think we ended up going kind of late fall, but it was November. And so we kind of thought, oh, there'll be a little bit of snow, so we could, check for tracks like that, And so we ended up, I remember seeing some wildlife, some deer when we went up the road. We decided we kind of went as far as we could go up that road, and then we parked it and camped. And I know one of the days, my dad was in the gold panning, so we decided, hey, let's, we enjoyed camping, doing different outdoor activities. So we just thought, well, we'll go down to this creek right up here up the road, and we'll do some gold panning. So we started gold panning, and I looked down in the sand, and I see this really detailed footprint, and it was a good sized footprint. The heel, I would say the heel part was missing, but the rest of it looked almost perfect. And which I don't know if it's, my mom actually may have that somewhere if she still has the old camera for it. But I saw this footprint. I took a picture, and I couldn't believe what we saw. Well, there was leaves down, and so I started to really check out kind of the trail that leads down to the creek from the road. And I could make out a large imprints, and I made out some small footprints. So it seemed to me like there was a large one and a small one that had gone down to that creek. I would have never seen that, in the leaves if it wasn't really paying attention to see, that was kind of what we both agreed on. It looked like some big ones and some smaller footprints. And so that was kind of cool to see, especially that one in the sand. So the next time I went up there, and I tried to hit it really, I went back in August. So I tried to hit it around the 20th, around that time frame from before. Those guys that we went to a cabin with that went to our church in the area, they were kind of optimistic and curious and open-minded enough that they were like, well, we've seen that Finding Bigfoot show a little bit. We'd like to check it out. And so I take them, I ride up with one of the guys he had a Jeep Wrangler. We went up there ahead of the other two guys. They were going to meet up with us later. So I took them right up to the spot where we had that one come up the tree line. And I showed him kind of like where it happened. And I said, he was, he decided just to hang out around the Jeep, so it was like fine, cool. And I said, I'm going to walk down that game trail that's up ahead and check it out and walk down there a ways and just, go down there and see if I see anything different from before. And so I walked down there, and he's just hanging out. I think he was a smoker, he was enjoying just hanging out by the rig. And so I come back and, probably 5-10 minutes back to him. And he goes, were you up on the hill? And I said, no, I was down over here, just, veered off, went a ways that way. And he goes, you weren't up on the hill? And because there was some rocks that go up kind of behind the camp, and then just up the road just a little bit and up on the hill. I kind of thought, well, let's walk up the road a little bit and kind of show me where it was. And he goes, I said, do you smell that? And there was a little bit of a smell. It wasn't strong, but it was enough that there was an indication there was something up there, And so I decided, well, maybe I'll just kind of start climbing up there and check it out. So I went up the hill, the rock, and I started going halfway up, and then the smell ended up going away. Later on, so the other guys show up. We actually decided to go down. There's 3 spots. There's one the low one we had went out with the whistle, right? There's one in between these two. It's up on a hill, and you got a nice kind of overview to go down into the valley. We went down to the low spot, and it was a Saturday night. It just worked out, that time, which for all of us to go. And so we drove down there, and the reason I guess I don't really think about it, because nothing happened at all. There's nothing to talk about really, but they were like, hey, you know what? It's quiet, nothing happened, but let's come back next weekend. And they're like, yeah, maybe we'll hit the spot up above in the middle. So like, okay. So we met back up at that middle spot. Now, one of the guys was a pretty big hunter, and two of the other guys had guns with them. One of them had a wounded rabbit and coyote and all these calls. Well, they started using it at night off in the valley. We did our calls. We socialized. We had fun, and just kind of, we tried different things. Well, nothing was really going on. We were sitting down. We were just all sitting down around where the fire would have been. And we hear this sound, and it's a rock landing. It sounded like a rock, a thump noise landing behind this tree that kind of went down the slope of this hill. And so I was like, did you guys hear that? And they go, yeah, it sounded like it was right behind this tree over here. And so they get up, I get up, and we hear rocks, what sounds like rocks, hitting up on the gravel right by our camp where the road goes up. And so me and this other guy, we decide, hey, let's throw some more rocks down the hill. We couldn't see nothing. It was 2:15 in the morning. One of the guys, which I didn't know he was going to do this, and he did, is he had a handgun right before this happened. I forgot, I should put this in because this is interesting to me. It's like, he decides to fire off a couple shots. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't personally just fire off a couple of shots like that. Anyway, he did, and then shortly after that, within minutes, this sounded like rocks coming in, and so we grabbed rocks, throwing them down the hill, and then we'd hear more hitting up on the gravel road, and then we'd toss some more down, and then it was just back and forth for probably I would say like 6 times. We were having fun with it. It wasn't anything scary or nothing, but we were like, oh, we're potentially having a game with these Bigfoots. On the other side of us, here's a rock coming in. We could tell it came from the other side because on the other side of these guys, couple guys. Well, then another rock comes in and lands right between the one guy that I started throwing rocks with, between his shoes. And he's like, that rock just landed there, and it was probably about golf size, I'd say, rock, landed between. And so they were having fun. And one of the guys, I haven't had permission for names, so I'm not, but he is a firefighter. Well, he said he had a tent, so I just decided, the other two guys had their vehicles. One had a Chevy truck, and then the other one, had his Wrangler. So they decided to sleep in their vehicles, and I was like, okay. So anyway, this guy, he, being a firefighter, he's used to, I guess, wearing earplugs and stuff, being away from home. We went to bed. It quieted down. I guess it quieted down enough with the rocks that we decided to go to bed. So everything got kind of quiet, kept us awake till, I would say, around 3, maybe 3:30, somewhere around there, before we actually went to bed. But I know it was after 3. So anyway, so I'm laying in there, and I hear this sound outside, and so I kind of elbow a little bit, say, hey, do you hear that? And he's not moving or anything. And I'm thinking, all right. So anyway, I finally wake him up, and I'm like, you hear that? And he goes, what? And it's like, he goes, you got earplugs in? So anyway, I opened up the door, and I didn't see anything at all. But I had left my voice recorder up the road on the gravel, and I covered it up. And so I guess fast forward, nothing else happened that night. None of us woke up. Well, the next morning I go out and I get the recorder up the road, and I start hearing on the recorder, like, I hear what sounds like, only I could think of as maybe feet, but it's like a like scooting or shifting on the gravel. And this was on from about, I'd say, 3:30 to 4:45, somewhere around there. So it did that a couple of times, whatever it was, and then you could hear wood hitting wood. It sounded like somewhere probably down in the forest. The next trip up, which the next one that stands out trip for me, is I decide, I decide by myself, which I kind of regretted this, but I decided to go up, and I'm going to spend the night up in that spot. And this was the same time of year, August. So I'd say this was 2012. I know it was shortly after. So like that summer, let me think. It was definitely there in that same time period. It was August, around the 20th. And I go up. So I go up to this area again. And I actually decided to go up by myself. I had bought a Jeep Wrangler, a new one, and I just was antsy to get up there. So I went up there, and I actually brought a shotgun with me, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go up here and see what happens. So I get situated, and I'm not really even set up. I think I just kind of, was antsy to get up there. I really didn't set up very well, and I just planned on actually just sleeping in the vehicle. So I pull in, and just park. I get out, listen, and it's getting around dusk, and it's just after dark. And so I would say around 10, and I hear something on one side of the camp. It's actually the upper side of the camp, not the one that veers down the hill. And I hear something running through the forest, and it's doing these deep snorts, and it's running, and it would turn around, it would run back through the forest, and it would turn at the end and run back through again, and it kept snorting. And I got pretty scared, and so I decided, you know what, this is what I wanted. But I just thought, you know what, I've had enough. I was like, this is too much. I mean, this, for me, it's like the sound of it sounded aggressive. It sounded loud, the snorting, and the way it kept running back into the forest. And I'm thinking, what is this exactly? And I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was bigger than a deer, and the way it was doing that. So I started to yell. Well, it didn't phase it at all. It kept on running and snorting. So it wasn't leaving. Well, so I had that shotgun in my hands, and I remember getting really scared, and I just thought to myself, this thing's not leaving. And I saw some people about 3 miles down at the lake, and I was up there all by myself, and there's no phone service. So I'm thinking, I don't know if I should have done. I knew I had let, others know where I was going to be. So it wasn't like I went up there and didn't say anything. But I felt like, okay, and I had my recorder going actually, and it picked up everything, the sounds running, the snorting, you picked up the snorting. And so I decided I'm jumping in my Jeep. So I get in my Jeep, and I turn it on, and I decide to turn it around because I had it the opposite way of getting out of there. And so I had to turn it around, and I'm sitting in there, and I could still hear it doing its thing. And then I just tried to calm down. And then I waited about 10 minutes, shut the engine down, and it was quiet. And I'm like, okay, you're okay. Nothing's happened. You're good. And then I decided to go ahead and kick back my seat and and just stay the night like I wanted to do. But I kind of felt like, if that was one there, it didn't want me there, is what I felt like. And I don't know if it was because I was by myself, because I've heard if you're by yourself, things could more likely be maybe a little bit more aggressive at times. So I don't know, but I ended up staying, didn't see anything, but I definitely, whatever it was making its presence there. Those guys I took up there too, they were pretty much leaning towards that they thought that that's what was happening, that there was Bigfoots around us. But we never heard anything. We never heard any movement, which is so, to me, interesting how these things can be as big as they can be, and you can't hear them moving around or anything. And so, okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was my amazing wife, Francie, which she goes, we actually have a blended family, and it's great, Anyway, so we ended up, we both love to go outdoors, hiking, camping, doing all that kinds of stuff. And so a couple summers ago, we actually did some research and we were wanting to find a new place to go camping. And so I had found that they had a recent sighting online actually over in Leavenworth, Washington area. And so the person kind of described about where it was. And so I was like, hey, we're wanting to do a camping trip. So we ended up driving over there, and we actually only had one night, which I wish we would have had more. But so we ended up driving there and getting there it was after 2 p.m., I think around the 23rd of August, 2022. There was that recent sighting. So we decided there was a lake right near the town. Well, we ended up going on this, it was BLM land or something. There was an area where you could camp, just pick a spot and camp across from the lake, across this road. So we went in there and we found a spot. And so we just set up our chairs. And so we were just kind of hanging out, and we didn't set up anything yet. And I hear a noise down in the trees, kind of downward from where we're at. And so I'm like, what was that? And so I decided to go ahead and take some pictures. And as soon as I took a series of pictures out there along that area, I looked, and right away I'm like, telling my wife, I'm like, what is that? And so she saw what I saw. So I actually panned across with my video, which it was a little distance out, so I wish it would have been better than it looks, but I could tell there was a figure, and you could see it when I panned across with the video too, that was still standing out there. And I couldn't see it with the naked eye, but I could see it with the camera. I was like, well, I see something there. So we got that, and I thought it was interesting. So, and then, like I said, it was no longer there. And so we were like, okay, cool. This is exciting. So it's like, we just got here and maybe saw something. So we go ahead and set up our camp, and then we go for a walk and down some of the roads, the gravel roads. And my wife had pointed out it looked like maybe bare footprints on the edge of the road that once had water, in it. So they looked a little bit not recent, but it looked like potentially could be feet, And so we kind of roam around and then come back to camp. Later on that evening, we had went to bed. So we had a tent where you can have the whole top open, so we wanted to be able to see everything. And so we're laying in there, and it's, I would say, between 10:30 and 11. And we did have, I thought was interesting, was we started hearing like the tree trunk in front of, like towards our feet, one of the trees. You could hear this scratching. It was this long shh, coming down the tree there. And then on the opposite side of our heads, we heard the same thing. It sounded like something scratching down a tree trunk at the same time, going. And I just thought, okay, that's not normal, So so we're laying there and but I could make out there was something else. It sounded like there was something else on the right side of us too. It just wasn't making much sound. And so that was interesting. Kind of a night, I took my wife up one night to that old camping spot where those rocks were thrown. And she, I'm telling you, was a complete non-believer. And but she's like, to me, it was like the unicorns, like no such thing. She doesn't even say a believer. She's a knower now. I mean, and I know when I took her up there, she woke up one night up at that old camp spot, and she said she felt strongly like something or somebody was watching her, in the night, but didn't ever see anything. She's completely believes, what happened to me and some of these things that I've told her in the past that have happened, and then what happened with us. And I know that it just seems like it's very difficult to have a visual, but I do know that a lot of things, I feel like get more educated on the subject, on what's going on, a lot of it that's going on around out there, that you kind of can put things together more. And so that trip, Leavenworth, I wish I haven't been back since, but I wouldn't mind going back and like trying to find those trees and seeing if I could see any marks, up and down those trees. But for there being a recent sighting, I'd say 2 to 3 months prior to that, I thought it might be a spot to check out. My dad, as far as my dad, he was not a complete believer, but I know he is a believer now, or he's a knower actually, because of what's happened. But before that, I know he told me when he was in his 20s, he went hunting, and he said that he just got this awful, awful smell and feeling like he's being watched. He never saw anything, but he knew something wasn't right, that feeling. And so I think that he looks back and he realizes, okay, that's probably what was going on. And that was up in it's Eatonville, Washington. So it's close to Mount Rainier. And then I've got kind of family around Morton, LB area, which is all kind of around that west, side from the mountain. My boys, well, there was 3 at the time. And I know one time, and just recently, my 18-year-old and 17-year-old talked to me separately about this. But they had told me this at the time. So when they were kids, they saw, they think, one. And it was behind their great-grandparents' house, which was just out of Silverton, Oregon. Now, they were playing in the backyard, and I actually talked to one of them tonight about it, and then last night the other one. So they both, maybe they had a little different perspective, but they were young. And for them to bring it up to me recently over these years and tell me that they all got scared, because at the time they told me about it, and I just kind of thought, the kids were out playing, they were playing with their cousins, they probably just think they saw something in the trees. Well, they tell me that they saw this very, like a basketball player, tall, hairy, like part of a body. And one of them said he saw the shoulder area, but it was, the one described it as it being like grizzly, like I would have to say like a darker brown, and the other one said more of a dark color. But they both described that they had seen this thing, and I don't think they got a good look at the face, but they said it was like just around a tree. And so they all kind of were, I don't remember how many of their cousins, but my oldest says he didn't see it. They said that they both seen this thing, and they all took off running and ran in the house. And I remember them coming in the house and saying they had seen something. But I just, I didn't really think much of it. But for them telling me now about it all these years later, when they were probably like, they're pretty close in age, so 5, 6, and 7.5, let's say, right around there, that telling me this, that I think that they must have seen something, but anyway, so that happened there, and it's kind of the edge of the Cascade Range also. They lived up in the hills out of Silverton. So there's actually a little town that's the closest to it is Scotts Mills, and then there's a road that goes up a ways called, nobody lives up there, family anymore, but it's called Crooked Finger Road, and it goes up along this river, and anyway, it was up there, and so it's a ways out, but yeah, so that happened with them, and so especially those two boys are pretty believers, with, at least I think they tend to believe pretty much everything, especially after what they know they saw something themselves. But so that happened to them. And that had to have been like, I would say, I mean, their youngest brother might have been around. So it may have been maybe 2010 to 12, somewhere around there, maybe 12. Somewhere right around that time, 2012. But it was probably summer, I'm thinking, but I don't remember exactly when, being outside and playing and stuff. But because there is a little altitude up there, I think it's probably about 2,500 feet elevation up there. And about the same where I was living too, up in Colton as a kid. I did hear a couple of things that were interesting up there where I lived when I was a kid. Like, I heard that there was a full-size horse that was killed in a field, probably about a mile down from our house. And I heard maybe a cougar, but I'm like, I don't know. But, here I was a teenager, or early teen at the most. But I heard about that. But I do know when I looked up on the BFRO, there was some bow hunters up there that had some encounters up on Goat Mountain. That was around, the mid 90s is when those reports were in. Now, the only other thing I could think of was I know one night I was with my mom and we were heading home, and we were about I'd say a half a mile just past where that horse field was. Actually, just it kind of dips down and there's a big hill that goes up. Well, you dip down, and we were actually looking for a couple of my uncles. They were fern picking actually at the time, and it was around dusk, and we go to hit this hill, and there's like a fence, and then there's a light pole, and we go up the hill, and we get up to the house, and my mom, I was with her, in the passenger seat, so she's like, I saw someone, but it looked, I don't think I just had a feeling not to go back, like looking for them. And she said, but it was where it was standing had to have been like super tall, where it was standing by that pole. So she may have seen one that night, but I didn't see anything, but she did mention that after when we got back. I had talked to, well, let me see, a couple of different times and on the phone to Cliff Berrickman. And, I actually met him in a conference over in Kennewick, but I had talked to him, and he told me that the cook I was talking about, he knew who the guy was, that was the cook at my grade school. And he said he actually, and back then in the mid 90s, he said that, and I remember this because the guy said he said he had 22 encounters, and that was back in the mid 90s. And so Cliff knew about this guy, and he said, so, it was about, probably 5 years ago, no longer than that, actually, when I had talked to him in person about it. Anyway, he said he wanted to talk to the guy, while he's still around, and get an interview from him and hear some of his encounters. And I don't know if he ever did, but I told him, I was like, because I, told him where I was at, and, he put it together. And the other guy was named Cliff too, that was with him, that investigated with this other guy. But Cliff wanted to talk to him and get some of his encounters. But the other guy, now he had one encounter, and I was surprised. My stepdad was he actually was a little open to a story because I know he lived in Estacada, and he said he was camping in a group and they had all these tents. And he said in the middle of the night that their tents were lifted and tossed with them in them. And they said they were spooked, to death. They got out the next morning and there was muddy, big footprints around their camp. So that's kind of his, basically his story of why he became into what he was doing. But yeah, and he was a pretty easygoing guy. But so I think it was easier for that guy, for my stepdad to listen to him. But the other guy is like, well, 20 some encounters. But who knows? I don't know. But yeah, so anyway, so I knew that there was things going on, but I didn't really see anything as a kid. And obviously my brother and I, we were never harmed if they were around. But when you look later on in life and put things together, you kind of realize that, to me, it was more than likely that they were coming around our property. And I know my uncle, one of the ones that Fern picked, he was living down in the trailer that was down at the bottom of our property. And he said he remembered, because he had seen one, he said, right? It was over west in Oregon there. And anyway, he said that he didn't know what it was, but he said he'd hear the morning hours, still dark, he would hear a bird going off. And he just thought it was not a bird, maybe he just, I don't know if he thought it was off, but he just didn't add it up to being a bird and being so dark in the morning. But I know we had a lot of coyotes as a kid in the back of our property pretty frequently at night. The only other thing I thought, which it could be the coyotes itself, is like when we first moved up there, right away, we took over, I think it was like an owner contract, for the place. And anyway, the people that lived there had chickens and a rooster, and they didn't have vents in or nothing. And within, I'd say 2 to 3 weeks, they were just disappearing one after another. And the last one to go was the rooster. He was around and then he didn't make it. So I don't know if it was the coyotes or what, but they disappeared. And it wasn't, just gradually disappeared over, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks, time. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to bring up, because I thought it was interesting. Okay. So we had a neighbor that was, he wasn't the best neighbor. Let's put it that way. A couple, actually, really. But one of them, at least my stepdad didn't get along with and very well. But one night we had a freezer on our porch and it was open, anybody could access, right? Well, my stepdad says that the neighbors robbed us. That, I don't know, I'm picturing him seeing somebody running down the road with some food. And I later on I'm thinking to myself, in nighttime, did he get a really good, view of this guy, or who he thought it was, or was it something else, that came in and helped himself in the freezer? So I thought that was a little interesting because, it's just who, I don't know for sure, but I just find it odd why would the neighbor come over and, I don't know, grab food out of the freezer? But so that happened. There's trying to think of anything else that happened up there on our property. The only other thing I could think of, and this is, if anything, this is kind of embarrassing, put it this way, but I'll say it in an easygoing way. We had a well issue. We had a hand dug well, and it was 80-foot dug, right? So the end of the summer, by September, it would pretty much be empty. It just didn't have enough water to last us. So we ended up putting a new well in. Well, while we were doing that, we had no facilities. So here I decide I got to go to the bathroom. So I decided to go over to the dark forest and get away, have some privacy. So I go over there and it's around dusk. Well, the timing isn't great, really, but you have to go, right? Anyway, so I go over there and I'm, waiting, and all of a sudden I hear all these footsteps running and coming up from down the slope in this forest. And I don't know if it's elk running, deer running, or what, but I hear all this ruckus just running up the hill, multiple, like I'd say a whole group or whatever, and it's running. Well, and I got this feeling inside, like, you have to go now. Just as instinct, I have to get out of here. So I go up, and then I just start beelining it through as fast as I could through the edge of that forest back onto our property. But I don't know what it was, and I thought later on, like, maybe it could have been, this is my feelings later on in life, that maybe it was deer or elk possibly, but they were running at high speed. So a group of them, and they could have been chased, is what I was leaning towards. Maybe was going on, but I don't know. All I knew is, you got that flight kicked in, and I just beelined out of that forest, and I remember getting scraped up, but I didn't care. I just had to get out of there, as quick as I could. And so I didn't go over there after that. But yeah, so that I think was the last thing I remember happening at the house there. So after I had talked to Cliff one of the times, right, I ended up, my coworker that I worked with, I worked with him for about over 14 years. I worked with him. He knew I was into Bigfoot a little bit, so we would talk off and on. Well, he tells me about a little bit of his hunting trips. And so he would go up the Mollala River area. He would go up between Colton and Estacada. Well, he goes up and he tells me, I found this footprint and I got the creeps. And he's a pretty big guy. He's like 6'3", I'd say 280, and he got the creeps when he saw this track, and it was going through this muddy, I don't know if it's a muddy like game trail, but it was going across it when he took that footprint. So he tells me, he gets a hold of Cliff, and Cliff was like, this is great. He goes, this is like a perfect, to him it was like he was describing the mud, kind of the lighter mud towards the middle of it. He said it's like flung back. It's like the way the foot moves. Anyway, he described it like, this is very, very, very likely a real footprint. So I talked to my uncle and I said, hey, and this was, by the way, in reference, this was 2017 is when my coworker, and it was November 5th. So when he was up there. So a week later, next weekend, I go up and with my uncle, and we end up finding this trackway, and it's going into the forest, and it's right in that area where he told me. I never found his exact footprint, but I put my boot, which was 9.5 size boots, and you can see on the one by the log. Anyway, what was cool was I found a track going into the forest, and I measured kind of on this hill mound, and then it was kind of a tree testing area, and they had the gate open. They happened to have the gate open, so we went in, but there was some fresh sawdust over the ground too when I walked into the forest. So it looked like these tracks went right over the sawdust, like right after whatever they were done doing. And so we found this trackway because my uncle goes, hey, you gotta see this. So we were following it. I couldn't jump to each track, and we could make it out for a little ways going down. And one of it like broke an old tree that was down, like it hit right in the middle. But so I thought that was a good find. And it was interesting when I remember when I measured this measurement on this track come out to be the same size as my coworker track he found. So it was the same length, I believe 13-inch. That my coworker did tell me he had heard screams up there off from a little ways, but he could hear screams. And he said one of the trips up there, he said that he found a deer, and he had two boys pretty close to my boys' ages, and he would take them up hunting with them and stuff, but scouting and stuff. But he had found up this road veering off from the Mollala River, he had found it was like ripped apart, he said, and he just kind of got this feeling like, well, this is not normal. We need to get out of here. So they left, and so he told me about that. But I just wanted to clarify too, which is no biggie at all, but that county right there, Mollala, Colton, that whole area, is Clackamas County. And Clackamas County has had a lot of sightings. I think that, as far as I know, the most sightings online is in Clackamas County, which, goes all the way out to Mount Hood, and I think it's over 1 million acres, Mount Hood National Forest. But so it's a big area, but yeah, there's been a lot of sightings. I know there was a guy I worked with, another guy, he was hunting grouse, and he told me about this. And he was going up it was Estacada, and I think he said it was, if I remember right, it was the Roaring River. And he said it was about 5 p.m. I don't remember exact dates on this. It was probably, I would say, let me see, say 2011, 2010. Anyway, somewhere around there. And he said he went up the hill and he heard this, he said, woman, sounded like a woman screaming. And down towards this river. And, it was still completely light and everything. But he said it sounded like, somebody with maybe Down syndrome, just how it sounded, like it didn't sound right. It sounded like a woman screaming, but it sounded a little bit off, kind of like, but it scared him enough that he took off and decided to forget hunting. I think he was hunting, grouse, and left. But he told me about that. And so I never went up into that area, but yeah, he is, and he's kind of a guy he was, I think around 60, and he seemed like a pretty tough individual person. And I thought for him to get rattled, that, yeah, so I think that's about all I can think of, Jeremiah, that stands out.
Well, that's absolutely incredible. I mean, we had talked before the interview, and I remember you saying, "Yeah, I got some other stuff besides the tent thing." And I was like, "All right." And man, you had some other stuff. So I do have a few comments. Like you mentioned the Goat Mountain, Oregon area. Like that area is known for a ton of activity over the years. I mean, you can look it up on. Even like, I don't know if you've been to OregonBigfoot.com is still up and running at the time of this recording. There's a lot of reports on there. And then on BFRO, and I've talked to an individual who had some pretty interesting stuff happen in the Silverton area. So that's a pretty, that's a pretty interesting area too. In the Mollala River area, I don't know, have you heard the interview I did with the gentleman about what happened to him in that area? This is like episode 580, the individual named Ed. If you haven't, you would really find that interesting. You probably have, though.
I just found you more recently, but I did listen to one where he's got the rabbit in the cage.
Yeah, that's
Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah. Okay. And he gets chased by the Bigfoot in the middle of the campsite. Totally. Yeah.
Yes, and that's right up there. And, when I talked to the Cliff, too, he told me the first time I talked to him at that conference, he told me back in the 90s, there was some homeless people living up there, and they would see these large, dark figures, around. And, it's kind of like I didn't realize living there for so many years around the area what a hot area it was for these things, and then not knowing too when I was a kid about really what was going on up there at that Colton house on Goat Mountain where I was living.
Absolutely.
But it kind of made sense, especially when my mom said, I thought was interesting was, your stepdad was gone. those nights when the activity, things would happen. And it's like, so it knew, or they knew, whatever, most likely that the male alpha was gone, So,
Yeah. Interesting.
so
The individual, and I was gonna ask this anyways. The two gentlemen that were Bigfoot researchers, you mentioned one of the names was Cliff, not Cliff Barrickman, but a
yes,
different Cliff. Who was the guy who
yes.
was the?
I don't remember his name right off. I don't know. And I know the guy, the other Cliff, he's actually wrote a book, and you probably even have heard of the guy. And I don't even know.
Oh, is it?
Honestly, I don't even know.
Bigfoot Highway, Cliff Olson?
Yes, Cliff Olson.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
Cliff Olson. Who was the one with, that, I mean, I probably didn't say it great, his story, but basically what happened, or what I remember him saying it, but so it was him. And then this guy, which, he was, like I said, for a cook for years. And then, the other Cliff, he knew who the guy was and he wanted to talk to him. So I don't know if he ever got to, but yeah, I don't know any of his. He just, said he had seen him. I know one of the trips up there, my stepdad was cutting wood and, sawing some logs and stuff. And he's like, well, he goes, have you heard anything? Or, I don't remember exactly what he said, but basically he goes, oh, I don't think they'd be around here for at all, because I'm, making all this noise and cutting. And they're like, oh, they could be up in the trees watching you. He's kind of laughing it off. And so, but it just like, it's kind of bugged me a little bit, because knowing what I saw, and then knowing that things were going on around it, he had no idea, but he did halfway, like I said, believe that Cliff Olson's story on his encounter. And so he was a little bit, but I find it funny is for me, like my stepdad, when he was a kid, he actually was up in the Estacada area, and he's told us before. And so he was watching over a logging camp. He was like 12 years old. And I mean, I don't remember back then if they carried a gun, but he did remember hearing screams. And he said, and it doesn't sound like there were coyote screams, but, he chalks them up to being a coyote, I'm sure, but it sounded like more of like a woman screaming, I believe, something like that. But he didn't believe it was what it probably was, but I think it did cross his mind, because even as a kid he had heard about it, but he was a complete non-believer, and I think he still is, but yeah, that's, but one thing I learned too was going up the Mollala River Corridor, there's been a lot of missing people up there, I've heard. And I would never, I mean, I know one time I went up there and I was going to hike Rooster Rock Trail, which is on the other side of Table Rock Trail. And I started to hike it, and I just kind of just spur of the moment, went up there to do it. And I started hiking it just the beginning. I'm like, you know what? I didn't let anybody know this is not good. So I just turned around and left. I'm like, not a good idea. Nobody knew where I was going to be, and I was just going to do this hike and come back. And I'm like, nah, not when I knew there was more out there than what most people knew, so, but I believe Finding Bigfoot actually went up there on that hill, is where they actually went for part of their episode they did, in the beginning, the first season. They went up, I believe it was the Rooster Rock side of that hill is where they actually went for part of what they were doing. A friend of mine actually saw the crew that I worked with, and he's like, oh yeah, I saw the crew up there. I was wondering what they were doing, but
that's funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do want to point out these places that are being talked about in the Mollala River, from what I know of, they're way out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, this is not a thing that you take lightly. You need to be prepared. I would hope people listening to this show are aware that locations that are talked about is very serious, and you need to be prepared, for weather to change. And this is just something that's been in the news lately. Unfortunately, that's happened. It's things can change,
Yes.
and you need to be prepared for these situations to arise. And I'm talking about, the two researchers that unfortunately were found up in Skamania County after going out on Christmas of this year. But
Yeah, that
yeah,
was unfortunate to hear about that, Jeremiah. Yeah, I heard about it. It was being local here, about it that it happened. My wife and I actually took a trek up, and it was snowing pretty good, which we don't have a four-wheel drive right now. And so we got up into some snow, and this was on the 25th. Just took a little drive up towards Trout Lake area, and we turned around because it was coming down pretty good, and we didn't want to get up too far up in there. But yeah, it's just the weather. That's the thing, is like I've learned too, because I've gotten a couple times up there on the mountain. One time, fortunate, it was turned into a blizzard, and that was rough. But another time where I was trying to get back to my camp from down in the valley, and just the wind really brought the temperature down. And I'm thinking either keep moving or build a fire.
right.
So it's just I normally what I would do was with my dad is we'd have radios so we could keep contact with each other as I'm going down through the forest. And he's had some back issues, so he can't trek too far, so he would usually stay back around camp. But we tried to play it safe, but I just learned, even for myself, it's like you're better off to go with somebody else. It's so much safer, because something could happen. And when you're by yourself, you could be, and I know for years up there, the cell service isn't good. And you get out there. I mean, it's like for me getting out to that spot, it's like from Mollala, it's like an hour and a half drive,
Oof.
on these roads to get up there. And so it takes time. And I've had a flat tire up there. I was with my dad. Luckily, it was at nighttime. And we actually had to change a tire on a hill with power lines. We were driving up the roads, and it happened on the way down. So we had to jack it up on a hill. It's just not a good situation.
Oh my
you know?
goodness.
Yeah.
Wow, dude. That's wild. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Wow. Absolutely. You've got some incredible accounts that you've been sharing over our time together. I'm so glad that you reached out, Brandon. It's talking to guys like you that it's just you find out some really cool stuff that's happened over the years.
Well, I appreciate it, Jeremiah. I appreciate, like I said, you kind of just your enthusiasm is kind of, because after a while, it's nice to kind of feel a little bit more fire inside about it, like kind of wanting to, because it's fun. It's fun to get out there, and it's fun to explore, and especially if you love the outdoors. And, my wife and I, we've done quite a lot of camping trips. Summer before last, we went on about 25 hikes up, because we live over in the Washougal, close to Vancouver area, but up the river, the gorge, the Columbia, there's lots of places to hike. And I know just down from here, I know Cliff has talked about recently about there's a dam down here, and they have frequent encounters, down at this dam, Bonneville Dam. It's just down about just over 30 minutes from here, and actually, one of my bosses that I worked with, he told me he's had a couple encounters. One up Mount St. Helens and hunting, and then because I heard about it from another coworker, like, hey, the boss has had some interesting things happen, so he's a believer, kind of thing. And so I asked him, and he said, yeah. And then he said the last incident was over in Stevens, Washington, just up the river here, down. And he said that it was screaming and all the sounds. And he goes, I was done hunting after that. And this was about 7-8 years ago. He goes, I'm not going hunting again. So.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Man, pass on my email if you want. I mean, I'd love to talk to him, but that sounds absolutely wild. I mean, yeah, that would be definitely enough to stop you from hunting.
Yeah, and I actually have one more. I just thought if I should share with you, Jeremiah.
Sure.
It's interesting. I don't have a lot of detail, but so one of my daughters, I call them, daughters, but stepdaughters, but they're great to me. They call me dad, and So one of them was camping with her husband. This was 2 summers ago in August, and we have 3 grandkids, so she has, two. And so they went up camping up in Gifford Pinchot National Forest, just the edge of it, where you go up on just on the southwest side of Mount St. Helens. So they went up there. It's an area we've camped at ourselves too, and with them. But anyway, they went up there, and they actually, gosh, it actually kind of turned horrible, actually, a little bit. So they started hearing these owl sounds at night around their camp. And there's just a camp spot where you just find your own spot, along this river. And there's lots of different nice places to camp. And there's a road that kind of veers off, and the main one that wraps up and around to Mount St. Helens. So anyway, so they had started hearing these owl sounds, but they said that the owl would like, it didn't sound right at the end. Like it was off. Something was off. So they were listening to this. And then they said that they ended up hearing noises, things coming in toward their camp. And they said that we were surrounded, what they told, me and my wife. They were surrounded by about 8 of these things around their camp. And so it scared them enough. They actually this is not funny, but they actually had an engine problem, and we ended up going up there, and their truck, it wouldn't start the next day. And I didn't hear about this. Well, I don't think I heard about it till after, but we just decided, you know what, they need help. They're up there, and see what we can do. I'm not really too much of a mechanic, but if we can do anything to figure out what's going on, why their truck won't start. So we went up there, and we couldn't get it going. They came back up. They had left and came back up, but then so to the exact spot, but they were kind of stuck there for a period because of the truck was broke down too. But when they left there, they told us like what happened, and they said they're pretty sure that was what was going on, and it scared them enough. They said they're not going camping again. Said we're selling all of our camping stuff. So that's what they told us. And her husband was big into fishing. So, I don't think he would stop fishing, but I think with the kids too, it's more like they were worried more for the kids, if anything. They're probably at the time about 5 and 6.5, but it really got their attention with that night, and it made them, because I told them, about some of the things that had happened before, but that was the first time, that like, I think my daughter's husband, he would go out a little bit with me, but they both really felt that was what happened that night, so it was August 1st, actually, I believe, because 1st or 2nd, because I remember before the summer hit, her husband told me, he's like, yeah, I really want to go up there at that time again and take some buddies from work and see what happens. That's what he told me. So over time, I think it was probably more than anything, the grandkids, and it really scared them. And anyway.
Man, my goodness. It's just, sometimes you talk to individuals and like they have something happen early in life, and stuff just follows them for the rest of their lives. I mean, and you are kind of putting yourself in the situation as well. We'll make that clear. We're going out to different areas, but you've just had some really intense things happen over the years, Brandon. And it's been a pleasure talking to you about it.
Yeah, well, it's been great being able to talk to you about this, Jeremiah. And I know for me, like, yeah, I've seen bear, I've seen cougar before, and I think at one time a cougar I didn't see it, but I'm assuming it was a cougar stalking when I walked back to camp. But I just feel like, yeah, but I guess, yeah, if you put yourself out there in those areas, there's times where nothing's happened, and camping's great alone, so it's like getting out there and having fun. enjoying company. You know, my wife and I really enjoy camping, like I said, and getting out there, and it's something we do. And, you know, we've gotten to hike up to Mount Rainier, around some of the trails up there, and some of the beautiful fall colors. This last year we went up there, and it was just, well, actually went 2 years in a row up there. I do know I have an aunt that worked up actually at Mount Rainier National Forest up there. And this was probably over 10 years ago. She actually told me that there was a report one summer. I don't remember about what summer, but she said there was a report of two different people seeing a white Bigfoot up there, and then another one that was, you know, a different color, darker, I'm assuming. But I thought that was interesting. So she did tell me that, and she had worked there. So yeah, so she lives really close to Mount Rainier, like, you know, just kind of close to Morton. It's close. There's like Mineral, Morton, LB, kind of that whole little area where some of my dad's side of the family still lives. But yeah, she told me about that one time.
Was that just something that was reported to the rangers in that area?
I believe so.
Wow.
I believe so. It
Okay.
must have been reported to the rangers, I think, and you know, and she relayed it. But yeah,
that's incredible. Yeah, white. I don't think I've heard a ton of white Bigfoot reports from that area, but I'll have to look through my episodes.
I noticed too, Leavenworth has got reports, you know, throughout the years around the area. And I don't know if you ever been over to that town, but it's a pretty neat town to see too. It's this barbarian, you know, town, and it's got all these, you know, it's touristy, but it's still neat to see. And then it's pretty beautiful because it's really tucked up, you know, against the Cascade Range, you know, on that side. So it's really a beautiful setting where it's at.
I know there's a lot of reports out of the lake. Is it Lake Wenatchee is in the same area? Something like that. Yeah, there's a lot of reports from out there. Yeah. But yeah, I've just stuck around Oak Ridge. Part of the Willamette National Forest is pretty much the main area I've been in so far related to Bigfoot stuff out there. So we'll see where I get to this coming year when I get out there again. So
yeah. So did you happen to, you don't have to tell me too much, but so you had an encounter yourself, right? I haven't actually heard yours, but so was it in Southern Oregon where you had it?
So there were a few weird things that happened out there just outside the town of Oak Ridge. I was out there for the festival, Sasquatch Summerfest, and I was going out with Priscilla Roseman Davis, the organizer. I went out with them and Jason Kenzie's film crew and some other people, and to this area where her father had some really interesting things encounter-wise happen. This is like way out in the woods on a service road. And so we were up there. Okay. We had, we got roared at. There was a roar, and then there was a roar/scream from the woods at us while her dad was playing guitar. That was pretty wild.
Wow.
There was a sighting in the meadow right next to it, like 5 hours before that. That actually was the day before. But that was pretty wild. That area is just so intense, and there's a lot of really intense things that happens in that area. You know, in Iowa, I've had stuff happen. I've had, you know, tree knocks, stuff get pushed over. I've heard whoops, stuff like that. Yeah. But out in Oregon, I haven't had any visuals yet. I haven't had any visuals across the board, but the vocalizations were pretty intense out there, and it's just an area where I definitely want to go back to, hopefully next year, see what happens. So
yeah, that sounds like they're pretty vocal out in that area, you know, which I haven't really experienced too much up here, except for that one night, you know, that one was vocal. I know just north of where we live, you know, I heard from a lady that's in her 80s now. She actually told me this, but there's a Colt, little town that's just north of Battleground. Yep. And she had heard that there was, I don't even know detail much, but basically a witness that witnessed like a female Sasquatch giving birth. And I
Whoa,
don't know.
what?
This lady's pretty like real. She's not the kind of person that would lie. So I don't know who she heard it from, but that is what she told me.
Oh, wow.
So she was a believer. So she believed this person, you know?
That's incredible. Wow, I've never heard. I don't think I've ever taken a report like that before. That would be something else. My goodness.
My uncle, which he may listen to this, he's really into Bigfoot, but his was Yam Hill is where he had his, he said,
Okay, yep.
when he was in his 20s. But I actually think I seen the graveyard because it's out in the country, you know, where it was, and it's kind of on this hill. But no, he told that story for years, and I didn't know. I'm like, well, maybe he's mistaken, maybe, you know, but I think he must have, you know. It's like, but yeah, so there's definitely a lot of areas, and I appreciate, you know, all over you doing, you know, these different interviews, but it's really cool to hear them local too, because it kind of gets you kind of excited in your area, you know, when you hear about some of these other ones that have happened around, you know. So it's kind of got me more in like, I want to talk to you and, you know, tell you about, you know, even though I feel like the best one I had was my visual, but it was really very scary as a kid, you know, seeing this thing, and this stone faced look, and you know, and then it never blinked, you know, like it was just staring. But the size of it, you know, was pretty short, you know. And I know when I researched after, I actually looked up the investigator that researched mine, and I found another report up at the same campground, and this was about 2001, I believe. And it was a couple, like a boyfriend, girlfriend. They had a dog. They went up to the campground there, and they woke up in the morning. Well, their dog woke them up. The dog was barking, and they heard these loud bipedal stomps going off. So I noticed he investigated that too. So I thought that was pretty cool that this guy, you know, didn't tell me about it, but I found it myself up at the same campground. So that's kind of neat.
Hey,
little thing to add.
Was that on BFRO or?
Yeah, because he was part of BFR. Yes, I believe so. Okay. Yeah, so I found that, and I thought, well, you know, it could have been the same family. It could have been the same one growing up more. You know,
absolutely.
Who knows? But yeah,
it sounds like it is a encounter, you know, and you were pretty young at that time, but it really affected you for the rest of your life. Probably set you on a path where, you know, it was just something you were always looking into as well, I would guess.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things I feel like, I'm sure a lot of other people, it's like, I kind of wish somebody else could have seen what I saw, you know, like nobody else was awake. And, you know, the only thing I question in my mind is, like, if I would have woke my dad up, which I don't, you know, see doing that. He was clear on the other side, but he did have a little pistol underneath his pillow. I remember that. And I, you know, I always wondered if I would have woke him up. It probably wouldn't have been good, you know, especially if this wasn't a full grown one and there was a mama or daddy out there not far, you know, kind of thing. So, but seeing the fire going too, it's like, you know, it was kind of neat that I could tell the fire was still going in the back. It was lit up enough that I could make out a pretty good amount of the face, you know. But it was just the ears was what kind of threw me off. Really, it was the only thing. And the hair was hairy, but, you know, it had a flatter face like a human. It was definitely very covered with hair all over except the nose and, you know, and the forehead. But it just, the way the hair went down, all the same thick length, and it was just standing with his arms down, that I knew that it was, you know, it was something that wasn't a man, you know. I kind of ruled out it wasn't a human, and it was too real looking. It was scary looking the way it looked. You know, it kind of looked mean in a way. Now, I don't know. Obviously, it didn't do anything, but it kind of looked not real happy the way it just looked. That no expression, you know.
Absolutely wild stuff. Brandon, I feel like I could talk to you for days, but It's been quite the conversation tonight. I just want to say thank you for coming on. Keep me in the loop, if stuff continues to happen, or if you hear other things, feel free to definitely reach out. I'd love to hear from you. It sounds like you got some good connections out there.
Yeah, well, I really thank you, Jeremiah, for having me on and being able to talk about this, because I feel like people need to hear about what's going on, and be careful out there, and be safe, especially when the weather is unpredictable too, like in the mountains. And I just appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Yes, sir. You have a good one. Thank you for chatting.
You too, Jeremiah. Good night. Okay. Bye.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.